Less than 48 hours after the end of the Phoenix Suns season, head coach Monty Williams has been dismissed by owner Matt Ishbia. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, why the timing was right for the move and where they should go next at head coach. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcasts. A big thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen to get the lowdown on the Suns looking for a new head coach. Big news, first domino, lots to get to. So I appreciate you guys all joining me to take step one in what should be a busy offseason. If you have not already, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're getting this show to get it in your feed every single day, plus bonus shows like this whenever there is breaking news. Let's dive right in, all right? Because I'm going to do this in a few very distinct sections. One, right now, why the move had to happen and why it had to happen now. I will then take a little bit of time to not just gloss over the amount of change that happened under this man's watch. And I don't want to do that first because I know you guys are excited to hear everything that's juicy. I'll close with even more juice after I do that to give you my thoughts on where they go next. So let's talk about timing. Let's talk about why the decision had to be made. And I'm going to go first to exactly what Monty Williams said in his closing comments to the media, both after Game 6, which I was at, as well as the exit interviews and media sessions that he did Friday at the practice facility upon the conclusion of the season. Two things that he said. Number one, and this is the biggest one, was related to the need to use the season as more of a preparation, more of an opportunity to ready yourself for what it is going to take to win a championship, right? And you can look no further than, for instance, I would say three teams have gotten a lot of credit for this over the past few seasons from people who really cover this stuff deeply and know all this. Zach Lowe, the X's and O's guys out there. Milwaukee, the year that they won the championship, got a lot of credit for going out of their way to switch more on defense, to put the ball in different players' hands, to just change what it was that they had been, be willing to play with Giannis at center more, all these things. I know it was a long time ago. I know the team that they beat to win that championship is the Phoenix Suns, so I'm not trying to give them a big pump up. They just fired their coach and have a lot to figure out themselves. So look, they're not in a great situation, but that is example number one. Example number two, this year's Denver Nuggets, another team that just beat the Suns. And maybe it's fitting that those are the teams that have forced the Suns into this position and that provide a very good, obvious template for now where the Suns find themselves. But this year's Nuggets went out of their way to change a little bit of how they play defensively. Now, do they switch still? No, Nikola Jokic is not going to switch. Do they, have Chris Bosh at center types of defensive swarming like the Miami Heat of those years? Are they Draymond Green and flying all over the place? No, Nikola Jokic is none of those things, but they use the regular season to try hedging, try blitzing, try drop, and be able to cycle through those things very distinctly depending on who was out there on the opposing team, who was out there on their team. The other example I would give would be the Utah Jazz. The last couple of seasons that Quinn Snyder was there. And look, they did not have the success. I think some of the locker room stuff caught up to them. I think their talent just wasn't ever going to be good enough. But they even had, for instance, Rudy Gobert out in the corner more. They had, different things that they were trying to do to switch things up. That has to be the approach. To me, the best coaches in the NBA are the ones, and you've heard me say this throughout the playoffs. I talked a lot about Monty Williams in the last couple of games when it started to become clear the Suns might not win this series, and I felt like it was both right to consider this move and felt like it was a distinct possibility that they did make the move. You heard me say repeatedly, time and again throughout that whole thing, the best coaches, find playoff coaches, which is what the Suns need, they find ways to maximize the talents of their players within the game plan that they are building based upon the opponent that they are playing, and they prepare the players on the team to execute all of that game plan to the best of their abilities. So ideally, you have players being put into the absolute best position to succeed, and they are prepared to execute that so that they can succeed within that structure. I don't feel like the Suns were doing that. When you have 3 straight playoff exits where by season's end, guys who you thought of as very impactful are no longer even able to do anything, that is a good indication that that is running its course. I think that is something Monty became very aware of at the end, and I don't think that should have saved his job. I still felt like he had that staring him in the face for long enough that it was time. And I understand if anyone out there in the organization is listening, if any people who have been around this stuff for long enough and think that I'm just coming at it like a know-it-all, I do not mean to do that. But I've been around this team. I have covered this team. I was at Monty Williams' introductory press conference. I was at Igor Kokoshkov's introductory press conference. I will be at the next coach's introductory press conference. I am coming at it from an informed perspective, and I just think that is where we were. Monty, if the past 2 years didn't jump out to him that some adjustments and adaptivity was necessary going forward, I don't think you can keep waiting for that to happen forever, even if he did speak to it. The other thing that I think created the obvious, that he spoke to, that illustrated the obvious need to move on, is the offense, right? He said in his in the Friday stuff at the practice facility when he was made available to the media, what eventually now is the last time, he spoke about the offense being less 0.5-ish, right? And I tweeted it in that the minute I saw that. That is big. I said, I don't know if Monty Williams will be the coach of the Suns long enough to make this adjustment, but 0.5 is synonymous with Monty Williams. It's the reason the Suns went out and overspent on Ricky Rubio once upon a time in Monty's first year here. It is the reason, in part, that they would target a player specifically like Chris Paul. Not that Chris Paul, as the talent, wasn't worth going out and getting, but I would imagine him being a point guard and whatever else made him an obvious fit in a way that other players may not. For instance, Drew Holiday, right? The Milwaukee Bucks go get Drew Holiday around the same time the Suns got Chris Paul. He wouldn't have made much sense here for the version of the team that the Suns had in that moment. Chris Paul did, because we knew he would work perfectly with Monty. We knew Book playing off ball a little bit more was going to be better for him. And obviously they go to the finals that year, and it very much was the right move. But a large part of that was because Monty Williams' offensive system, that 0.5, you're making a decision in half a second, is what you were building around. I think that had run its course, not just because of the Kevin Durant trade, mind you, right? I don't think that it's just because of KD. I think that there's something to be said for when you have Durant on your team, things are going to be a little bit different. But I also think that some of those principles should have been moved away from sooner. You know, the idea of this DeAndre Ayton problem that the Suns have had, right? There have been these pockets of time, I think most notably in the first round against the Pelicans. This is not me saying that DeAndre Ayton is without blame. I know that's been a conversation out there of like, it's one or the other, whose fault, this and that. I think that's a little bit ridiculous. But I do feel like when a player like Ayton is able to show, when Booker goes out in the first round against New Orleans in 2022, an enormous amount of offensive skill out of seemingly nowhere, and then that goes back right back to the background the minute that Booker comes back. And we really have not seen that from Ayton since. He had some nice games in November, December of this past season, but nothing to that level. Why is that, right? I think you can even point to Mikal Bridges and the breakout that he's been able to have with Brooklyn. Obviously, the Suns were never going to offer him a role where the ball was going to be in his hands to the extent that it was in Brooklyn. But I think there is a level of trying to fit somebody like Bridges into what the Suns do. Can you run a Devin Booker set? Can you be the ball handler in a pick and roll based on our core principles? Well, probably not, right? That's not exactly what Mikal is great at. That's not really what he did all the time in Brooklyn. But obviously, from what the Nets and Jacques Vaughn and that staff have been able to show us, there was a role out there where Mikal could have done considerably more at a more consistent rate. And so those two things, right? And they're kind of hand in hand, right? Like it's like you should be doing things to prepare yourself for the postseason from day one of training camp. I don't think this team did that. I think that they were a little bit stubborn and stuck to their ways. Secondarily, I think you look at the offense, which is part of what you should have been preparing over the course of the season from day one of training camp. But time and again, that offense was not imaginative enough and not getting the most out of its role players and the most out of its collective sum to feel good about. And it fell apart. I think even though the Suns scored 100 points in Game 6, that's not enough. I think that game was mostly a defensive failure. I think you could say that the finals in 2021, I don't know which way you lean. I think it was primarily an offensive failure, but maybe you could also point to the defense there. But I think if the Suns had a more coherent identity on offense and they were more flexible in that identity, they would have been in a lot better of a position to succeed. The fact that Monty Williams spoke to it was kind of evidence enough that we all knew what the deal was. Let's talk about what Monty meant for this situation in Phoenix, and we'll get to where they might look next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by eBay Motors. The best teams need the right parts, and maybe head coach is one of those. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Again, every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head over to eBay Motors. With their eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage on the site and look for the green check to know that the part will fit that car or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, so let's talk a bit about what Monty meant. But before that, I do want to wrap up the last segment just by saying one more update here, and this will bleed into what I'm about to talk about. Monty Williams, it seems like, was fired by Matt Ishbia. And that always felt, I didn't even have a chance to talk about it. I didn't end up doing an extra show on Friday. And here we are Saturday. It's already over. But all along, I felt like Monty, it was going to have to be Ishbia getting involved. I'm not trying to challenge James Jones' ability to do the right thing. I'm not trying to say anything negative about him. It's more so just that those two guys were so inseparable that I feel as if, James is a very young executive, right? I believe he's younger than Monty, right? And so I just feel like there was this, James was the GM for a full year before Monty ever got hired. But it feels like there was just this conjoined nature to everything that went on. What do you think of this? How should we approach that? They are the faces of this franchise and everything else. And so Ishbia goes out and does it. I think that's not insignificant. One, because it shows sort of who the final decision maker is here, But also, I think it's another indication of his willingness to spend, right? Because Gambo had a thread on Twitter, John Gamador of Arizona Sports, on Thursday or Friday, whatever it was, about this whole situation. If you remember, Monty signed an extension last summer with this team. The numbers seem to be not fully out there. The initial deal, I think, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years and $25 or so million. I think that this upcoming year would have been the last of that. So he's a year from even starting that extension, right? And now he's already gone. But what that means is he had the $5-ish million of the annual salary from the first deal, plus the 2 to 3 years at somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10, or we don't really know, $1 million for 2 to 3 seasons. So they're going to be having to be on the hook for somewhere between $25 and $35 million when it's all said and done here on Monty's contract. That's pretty big. I mean, Earl Watson fired, see, Freudian slip there. Robert Sarver fired coaches all the time, right? Earl Watson, Igor Kokoshkov, etc. But part of what we always came to find out about those coaches and why he was so gung-ho about always hiring these first-timers was because they were cheap, because you could sign them to 3-year deals, which is not industry standard. Most times in the league, at this point, coaches get 5. It's almost a default, but not only did Sarver not go with 4, he would like to go with 3 because he was a cheap dude. Which brings us to sort of where we go now. All right, not where they'll go with the coach. I'll talk about that to close, but where we are now, I guess is a better way to put it. Because the 5-year deal is sort of this symbolism of exactly what I'm talking about, of how much Monty represented a sea change here in Phoenix. It's genuinely like, I understand Monty's not the most popular dude. I understand I've been accused of being too supportive of him. My tone has obviously changed on that during these playoffs, as the everydayers listening will know, but whatever. Maybe I have been a little too easy on him. Maybe I'm overly supportive. Whatever you feel about that and when he should have been fired and how good or bad his overall performance has been in the playoffs the past couple of seasons, there's no getting around the fact that that man, that coach, changed the fiber of this organization. This organization was a laughing stock. I know that there are a lot of people who have maybe gotten more into the Suns, gotten back into the Suns, are KD fans, Chris Paul fans, whatever, who maybe have started to root for this team since it has been a little more fun to do that. But anyone who is a fan back in the dead years, the early part of Booker's career especially, knows how, frankly, just embarrassing this entire organization was. And come to find out, not only was it cheap and the building was in a bad place and old, and the salary wasn't being, the money wasn't being spent on salaries. These first-time head coaches led by a very young general manager. We also know during all of that now that Robert Sarver was parading around the place doing whatever it is that he seemingly wanted to do. The HR department didn't exist, and all these awful things were going on. That's where we pick up with Monty Williams getting hired. For some godforsaken reason. I think the reason is Devin Booker, right? And James Jones, potentially. Monty Williams had an offer on the table to coach LeBron James, and I believe the Anthony Davis trade had already happened or was about to. It was very clear Anthony Davis was going to become a member of the Los Angeles Lakers. Monty decides, I'm going to go to Phoenix. And every single thing that's happened since can be traced to that day. Really. I really, truly believe that. And his demeanor, his priority, and focus on building a culture, all of those things lead me to genuinely feel that his ability to come in and make an impact is the impetus, the starting point, the butterfly effect of everything. The team became competitive overnight. I understand they signed Ricky Rubio. They had Kelly Oubre already. Whatever. But Mikal Bridges takes a step forward to being one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA under Monty Williams' watch. DeAndre Ayton finally stops looking like a chicken with his head cut off. Maybe his relationship with Ayton is part of what has now led to his downfall. Who knows? But clearly, Monty came in and made an impact there. And I think maybe more than anything else, if you'll also come back to 2019 with me when this guy got hired, it was pretty realistic and almost maybe likely, depending on where you stood at that time, that Devin Booker was on his last ounces of patience with what it is that was going on. They had just hired a new head coach who was supposed to be this hotshot offensive schemer. You know, maybe with this idea that they were going to draft Luka. They didn't do that, obviously, partially, as far as we all know now, maybe because of Booker fit concerns, personality concerns, whatever. It leads to a series of decisions being made, Igor coming in, all that stuff, Trevor Ariza signing, all that. Pretty much goes about as poorly as it possibly could. Ryan McDonough gets fired. They go through another sub-20 win season. And if Booker had asked out on the next day after that season, I don't think anyone would have blamed him. And yet he sticks it out. They hire Monty. Then they get Rubio, right? They get a little more competitive. The Baines trade, the Cameron Johnson draft night trade, Dario comes in, and suddenly there's a basically 500 team, then the bubble, then, the finals and everything. We know the whole history from there. And so Booker being put into a position where he was having the best seasons of his career, efficiency to match the productivity that he had always had, a comfort level about what was going on around behind the scenes and around the organization, and obviously team success. All of that happens. And maybe you don't want to attribute that all to Monty. I don't know. It's obviously impossible. We're all just guessing. But even if you think somebody like Mark Bryant had a big impact on Monty, I would probably agree with you. Or I had a big impact on Ayton, right? But I would probably agree with you. But what I would say is, well, didn't Monty hire those guys? I mean, he damn near poached the entirety of the Oklahoma City coaching staff with Darko Rajakovic, Mark Bryant, and some others. He then goes out and gets Willie Green. He's hired amazing as Kevin Young after that. He's hired amazing assistants. He already has his own coaching tree. I mean, we haven't had a chance to talk about it because of the playoffs, but Kevin Young's already getting interviews, right? Willie Green became a head coach. Darko Rajakovic went over to Memphis, and now he's basically their number 2 and is getting on these coaching lists and interview lists himself. That's 3 guys who very well could become head coaches in the coming days, or coming years, I should say, who were hired by Monty. This is a team that did not spend a lick on its assistant coaches for a long time under Robert Sarver. Basically, after Alvin Gentry left until Monty got here, they did not spend on that stuff. Monty got the buy-in, found the right people, and made a sort of proof of concept to Sarver, to James Jones, that if you hire these people, it will make a difference. Your players will get better. This team will get better. I'll be able to do my job better. And it worked, right? So much of where the Suns are right now happens because of Monty Williams. That said, we have seen time and again what happens when teams do flip that switch and find the right person to take them to the next level, and what happens when they don't, right? A player on this team, Kevin Durant, experienced the limitations that can happen when a coach is stuck in place for too long before change is made. Now, Kevin Durant had Scott Brooks. They did finally switch over to Billy Donovan. I don't know if you would say that necessarily got them over the hump. They, I think, were a little more imaginative and better under Donovan than they were under Brooks. But you would obviously also look to the Warriors, where Durant also was. They go from Mark Jackson to Steve Kerr. You have the Doug Collins, I believe it was Doug Collins to Phil Jackson. There might have been a coach in between there with the Michael Jordan Bulls. You have even, I would say, Vinny Del Negro with the Lob City Clippers, to then the Doc Rivers hire, right? All these different things that take teams to the next level because you can tell that the coach in place is not going to go ahead and get the job done. With that said, let's talk about who comes next. Who could that next coach be? Because time is here. It was the right move, and they got to nail the next one. We'll do that. Talk through the options, who my pick is, after one more quick break. Coming back here, I want to say one thing off the top in terms of how the Suns should be approaching their next hire. All right. I think that the obvious place you go with all of these situations, we had a lot of this talk with the Bucks, who just fired their coach, and it's going to be similar with the Suns. Do you go in the direction of an established guy with pre-existing experience, or do you hope that a first-timer, you would still like an experienced, you're not like the JJ Redick interview that Toronto just did. You're probably not going that direction, right? But do you try to find your Joe Mazzulla, for instance? I know that was extenuating circumstances with Udoka being suspended, and then Mazzulla was already on staff. But one of the guys I'm going to talk about sort of falls into that category. Do you go there, or do you, again, go to the established guy with a legacy, guy with a pedigree? I think I think that logic would indicate that they go in the direction of an established person. And I want to mention another report that has already come out since this move was made is that the Suns are expected to pursue Ty Lue. All right, that is from Mark Stein of the Steinline, his own Substack, longtime ESPN guy, very well-sourced person. He says Ty Lue is sort of top of their list. Ty Lue is under contract with the Los Angeles Clippers. We don't know what their offseason is going to include. We've already heard that the Bucks are expected to poke around Lue. 2 teams lining up to hire somebody who's not even available officially is a little bit fishy. Maybe that means that there's a little bit of an understanding around the league that he actually is available, but they have not fired him yet. They've not made any, there's not leaks going around, okay, Kawhi and Paul George are out, or any of that stuff that would lead you to believe, okay, the Suns can go get, or the Bucks can go get Tyronn Lue. Obviously, if he is available, I think in terms of the respect that he's been able to earn from head coach, from players as a head coach, from players around the league, from other coaches around the league, you would think that's probably a big home run. If you can get Tyronn Lue, I don't even think you have to think twice about it. I don't think you really need to worry too much about interviewing a ton of other people. If that becomes a realistic possibility and pathway, based on the things we've talked about, which is building offensive structure and flexibility into a championship team. Is Ty Lue the best offensive tactician? No, but I also think he's been crafting offenses, quote unquote, around Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Kevin Love, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George. I'm not sure an absolute ton of flexibility is needed there. I'm not sure a ton of structure per se is needed there. It's about working with your players to put them in comfortable situations where they can be their best, great, amazing, legendary selves. And I think he's done that, right? So, and with the postseason stuff we've talked about, I think if anything that if there's any quality that Ty Lue is distinguished at within the NBA, it is when his teams get to the playoffs, guys know what they are going to be expected to do, and if they can execute that, and typically they do execute that, the team is going to be in a very good position to win the game at hand. The specific opponent, the specific roster and rotation available to him is going to be empowered to be the best that they can be. Think about how great Russell Westbrook is in that first round. I think that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. If they cannot get Ty Lue, and again, all indications right now are that they cannot get Ty Lue because, again, he is the coach of the Clippers until further notice. I would actually go the other direction. I don't feel like a lot of the other options available are necessarily going to be difference makers in terms of the pedigreed people, because I'm prioritizing offense if I'm the Suns. I think it's a little overblown at times when you say, oh, this guy's offense or this guy's defense. I think, you want to shy away from that a little bit. However, I would be trying to do offense. And a lot of the guys available are more defensive minded, right? I would say, Nick Nurse is primarily a defensive coach. I think that he tends to build a scheme and structure and get very creative on the defensive end of the floor. And then offensively, he's just going to sort of, put the ball in the hands of his best players, play them 40 minutes a night, and hope that good offense happens. I'm not saying they don't do anything creative, but I definitely don't think that Raptors fans, if you listen to them or watch that team, that they were necessarily feeling like their players were maximized, right? I think OG Anunoby is a great example of somebody who, is frustrated actively with that organization because he's not been put in a position to score the ball at his best levels. Frank Vogel will be the other one. I don't think that he's an offensive guy. Now, you can always hire assistant coaches. I think Vogel or Nurse, if they ended up being the hire, I don't think it would be the end of the world. I don't think it would be a tragedy, but I think you want to go a little bit more, again, on the offensive side of things. With that said, I think the best candidates in that space are going to be assistants. And so here's 3 names, all right? I think one is on the Suns staff, Kevin Young. I have no way of knowing how Kevin Young's relationship is with, let's say, Kevin Durant, who he never worked with until 3 months ago. I will say that he is the guy who works out Devin Booker, who has developed a pretty close relationship, it seems like, with Devin Booker, and sort of been the person on the coaching staff, at least, that has that back and forth. I mean, we know that Book is in the off season works a lot with his dad and some of his friends and colleagues in basketball, because his dad has that history in the game. But on this coaching staff, it feels like Kevin Young is that guy. He's been a head coach in the G League, been a very successful head coach in the G League, and has been with Philadelphia and now Phoenix in high-level assistant roles. I think he would do a good job. I think he's ready for it. He coached when Monty was out with COVID at times. He acted as the head coach, and he's been getting tons of interviews around the league already. The other guy, not in Phoenix, is Dan Craig, not the James Bond actor. Dan Craig, who was with the Miami Heat for a long time, also had one season of head coaching experience in the G League when he actually won Coach of the Year, and then has been with the Clippers since as their associate head coach under Ty Lue. To me, I've not understood for a long time why this guy has not become a more serious finalist or something like that for a head coaching spot. He's not super old. He's only 41 right now. But I think the relationship that he is likely to have had with James Jones, combined with I believe that they would have overlapped in some way, combined with the pedigree that I just attribute in large part to anybody that's touched cross paths with Eric Spoelstra. Yeah. Dan Craig began his coaching career as an actual assistant coach in 2012 with Miami, which is obviously James Jones would have been there, but I believe he was in the film room. He joined the Miami Heat as an intern in the video department starting in 2003. He was a video coordinator for 2 years, later promoted beyond that, and then he was eventually elevated to video coordinator / player development coach in 2011, and then became an assistant coach officially in 2012. So he was with Miami for an incredibly long time, and now he has been with Kawhi and PG and Ty Lue actually, I think he started there back when he joined the staff when Lue got hired. Pretty good coaching staff to be a part of. Speaking of that coaching staff, my last candidate that I will throw out, and trust me when I tell you, none of this is reported by any means, but I think Sam Cassell is ready. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I'm not sure what else he really needs to do. He was a longtime coach a longtime player in the NBA, and he's been a coach for a while now as well, with the Clippers under Doc Rivers, and then with the Sixers now under Doc Rivers as well. If you look up some of the stories about him, he has been credited by a lot of star players for their development over the years. He's been thought of as a little bit of a guard whisperer, I guess, and I like the idea of somebody who has a lot of experience, is a former player, and has had a player development track record. But we think of player development as like, oh, you bring the young guys along. But there's a version of player development that is like, how do we get the most out of veteran players? And especially, I mean, the reality is going to be, as we talk more throughout this offseason, the reality for these Suns is going to be getting guys who are maybe, on the out, somebody like Josh Okogie, right? Can you continue to find Josh Okogies and continue to make them the best version of themselves? That's another form of player development. I mean, frankly, what is the next chapter of Kevin Durant's career going to be? If he's less able to have the ball in his hands and be a, creator, like we started to wonder about and worry about after this second round series and after last year's sweep in the first round, well, can you bring a coach in who maybe can work with KD, earn his respect, and develop along the mid 30s of his career, right? Those are all things that are included there. And so I like the idea of Cassell being a tactician, a player, having a player's mind, being well respected by two of the better coaches in the league between Doc and Ty Lue, and having that track record. I think all three of Young, Craig, and Cassell would be very solid options. And if they're not able to get Lue, I do tend to believe that that's the type of direction that you should look. Despite the fact that those three guys who I just listed are not NBA head coaches, I just think with Udoka and Quinn Snyder gone, you're probably not going to find a coach like that. You're not going to find somebody who just got fired who can help you, because I think those were the best two. And for whatever reason, they both rushed into new jobs in Houston and Atlanta. I don't know why, but they did it, and they're not available anymore. So you're going to have to look elsewhere. So I guess I would have it as Lou if you want the pedigree, and that's actually an option that becomes available. If not, I would not go in that direction of reputation and pedigree and experience. I would find offensively minded, well-respected, experienced lead assistant coaches, those three I just listed primarily, and I would start there. We'll see what the Suns do. We'll see if they already had something in mind. It's a little too early to tell. I hope that gives you everything you need to know. This is obviously not going away. Monday, I will be back with Brendon Duenas breaking down this, as well as what else is facing the Phoenix Suns as the offseason begins. Everydayers, you can look forward to that in your feeds that day. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already to get that show, and I'll talk to you then.